big difference when you walk inside.
Get in for roll call.
Wait until tomorrow afternoon. I heard it's what, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, the graduation?
This will be heavy rain at that time, so they may be moving to the high school.
Oh,
So, maybe luck out.
it'll be chaos over there. No, I didn't.
All right, thank you. It is Thursday, June 5th, 2025. We'll call to order the Halliwell Multigenerational Building Committee. We'll start off with roll call. Mr. Nigerian.
Here.
Mr. Savini.
Here.
Mr. Punchak.
Here.
Mrs. Tebow.
Here.
Mrs. Paulus. Mr. Mayo. Mr. Pendergast.
Here.
And Mark is Mark here, Scott?
He's coming out.
Okay, and Mark is on his way. Perfect. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Any folks that want to speak? Okay.
Say something.
Okay. Perfect, thank you. Next item on the agenda for discussion, consideration, and action, BH+A building design update and schedule. Online we have Joel Bargman and Jeremy Tobin. So I think they have some updates for us on their DEM meeting and kind of an outline of what we're, as a committee, giving us some highlights of decisions that we need to be making as we move forward.
Well, thank you. Thanks for doing this on Zoom. The last meeting was over 3 hours getting down there with they're putting the girders up over 495 and the Mass Pike, so it's almost done. So I think it was great not to have to drive through that traffic tonight in the 92-degree weather, so thank you. I have the first item on the agenda. Jeremy's online as well. Just an update on the Rhode Island DEM meeting. Paula Engineering led that. Seaver, the wetland scientist, and Peter, whom we met at the last meeting with the town council, were the presenters. stormwater calculations, and it takes some time because they have to do the stormwater for the entire access drive in the existing areas, not just the new building and the parking lot. So they're on, it sounds like a long time, but they're on schedule for submitting the 18th of July, and we would then have the clock start ticking, and sometime September would be that 60-day point. That still gives us plenty of time if we want to try to get to bid as scheduled in December, another 3 months of contingency. So they are proceeding that way, and what we were going to suggest is that we use that same deadline as the submission to the planning board for the site development permit. So July 18th, we go to our Rhode Island DEM, and we go to the town of North Smithfield for the planning review. And Jeff, I know you're on the planning board, I don't know if you have any comments on that, but that's a summary of the permitting side of the project.
Okay, great. Mark, I know you were interested for that DEM submission. So did you have any additional comments or questions?
I think I just came in a little bit late, and I think Joel probably covered most of it, but the focus of the DEM advice, right, to us was the existing layout for the limited use in the building, and not to include any of the other or any of the master plan, because it was likely, based on the walking trails and the ball field being so close to or in the buffers, that could elevate the application into a major application, and that could take up to or exceeding a year to make to that process. And they suggested we not bog the process down, and that this plan, as Joel had just mentioned, the majority of the building and the parking that's being proposed is out of their jurisdiction. There is limited removal of some asphalt that PAR is going to have to do a calculation. Depending on how that calculation comes out, it could be 1 or 2 application processes, but they were thinking that it would be just a general permit with an insignificant alteration based on this plan and the removal of the existing asphalt out of the buffer areas.
Does the committee have any other questions for Joel as far as the DEM permit? All right. Thanks, Joel. That was a good overview for that.
So I did have a question, Jeff. So Joel, is PAR Engineering, have they been authorized to proceed with, doing they were going to do some soil testing and groundwater and start to initiate their design? Has that been approved? They doing that?
We've given them authorization to proceed.
Okay.
And they're saying that they would have the testing and the application ready to go by, make a submission on July 18th. And they're suggesting that they will also be ready for the planning, North Smithfield Planning Board on the 18th of July.
Okay, great.
I forget exactly how it was left with the town council. Do you need to get incremental approval to now go forward with both submittals, or that was implied through the approval?
No, they gave that approval to move forward.
Oh, yeah, and now I'm assuming, it may sound silly, but I'm assuming that the planning board would be asked to waive the filing fee, or does that need to be asked? I mean, it's a natural
that's a good question.
It's a natural question to ask.
Typically, in other towns and cities I've worked in, all town projects, the fee does get waived, but I'm not sure in North Smithfield if that applies.
Times are tight.
Right.
I think, I don't want to speak for the administration or the administrator, but I think we could waive the filing fee and the review fee.
Perfect.
I think that's,
I don't know.
that's it, yeah.
Budget season.
All right.
Unless, of course, Joel wants to pay it out of pocket, that would be fine. It's only $600, Joel.
You can't see Mark, but he has a big smile on his face. So just to give you some context for you guys.
Well, I guess the other question is, should you make a motion to agree and endorse the strong recommendation, both from our planner and from our architect, that it be sequential, that only the building be submitted to DEM? Again, I don't know if it needs to be formalized to that extent.
I don't think so. I think we had the pretty thorough discussion with our joint meeting with council. They approved the site plan to move forward as it is with DEM, with the implication that the other items that were addressed in the master plan would be a later phase.
Yep.
So I think we're covered.
I think it's critical that we start this process now, that the building has been settled on, the layout and everything, and you run simultaneously with PAR developing their design, which is less of a site design now and more of an engineering design to accommodate it, in that, BH+A start to move forward with its process in doing the actual building design for its bid spec, so that once the DEM application comes in, as and you go through the planning board, that the next step is, I'm thinking to put those bid documents together and get them out.
I have a question. So the $1 million, the separate $1 million, what is that going to if we don't do any of this other stuff? And the reason I ask is, does it make sense to do 2 applications to DEM?
I don't think the DEM application has anything to do with the federal appropriation. I think we need to, and I know that Mark and Bobby are working on that now. There was a lot of ambiguity in that application, and I think we have to add details to it, but I don't think we have to fast track the second phase of the DEM permitting to be part of that. I think the most important thing right now, because there may have been some portion of that $1 million we maybe could have segued over to the building.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Mark, if you and Bob have had any conversation about that.
Well, so to answer your question, the application was written for a passive recreation project that included walking trails, benches, and Wi-Fi throughout the site. I think as long as portions of that grant are used for a recreation activity associated with the site, that some of that funding could be used for that. As well as, my thought was, if you're going to have accessible Wi-Fi around the perimeter, that there has to be a base for that, and that would be the building. So you might be able to finagle the Wi-Fi or whatever technology you're putting interior to the building to the exterior and pay for that out of the grant. Thinking about the walking trails and what you would want to do, I mean, I have my own thoughts about that, and maybe it's not appropriate to share that today, but, the focus of this is, multi-generational, and seniors are going to be there too, and perhaps, a rubberized walking path in the upland on there with benches incrementally placed might be something alternative to cutting a trail through the wetlands that could save that permitting. And, to be honest with you, trails through wetlands, they have their benefits and they have their negatives. One of the negatives is the permitting, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to have wetlands crossings, and they actually mention that. Will you be culverting? Will you be building bridges? A lot of that will be eaten up. That $1 million will be eaten up in the permitting and the design, never mind the construction of that. So, maybe that's a conversation for later on. But it's really a recreation grant, so it would be recreational uses associated with the site, not necessarily the building, but if if those two match, then they match.
Bocce ball courts.
What's that?
Bocce ball courts.
Well, one other quick question. I don't want to get too far off the tangent, but it's a little bit ambiguous. I'm wondering, can any of the 1 million be assigned to the improvements to the access to the property?
That would be effectively in conflict with the appropriation.
Okay, that's what I,
That'd be a hard ask,
yeah, okay.
and we certainly don't want to give you the excuses.
So it's not worth going down that road,
I wouldn't,
literally.
no.
Okay.
I have a question. The initial plan is to move the community garden up towards the building. And in doing so, we might need new fencing, we might need water, we would like a shed, and we would like a, we call it a yard, which would just be stockade fence or crap and keep it out of sight. Because the last pictures that Joel sent with all of our bags of leaves and everything look terrible. So I'd like to have them tidy, but I don't know if any of that would be covered.
Sounds like it.
So to answer that question and to maybe, is there a landscape, there's a landscape architect associated with this part of the project too, so that's something that they would want to look at. But yes, the community garden was specifically called out in the $1 million grant. So any funding associated with that garden could be attributed to the grant.
All right. Any other further discussion or comments on the site plan? Okay.
Should I keep going?
Yep, go right ahead, Joel. We can move right in.
Well, with the DEM notification, we have begun to develop the drawings just in a design development way. So you can see they're beginning, they're not colored and they look different, but we haven't really gone into depth. We're just trying to get, you know, a leg up on the schedule so that we can deliver on time. So we have the beginning of what our design development drawings here, and we have our consultants proceeding on landscape, on the civil engineering as mentioned, on the structural, and on the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. And what Jeff had suggested, which is a good idea, was that I sort of outline a schedule of what we would be doing and what we would be needing from the building committee over the next several months until we get to what we're calling, it's a small building, so we're saying we're going to get to 60% completed documents so that when we get a cost estimate, it's far enough along that it's really, the next cost estimate is really indicative of what's in the building, and then the last completion of the drawings doesn't really add to the cost, it just fleshes out details and gets the permit applications completed that we need for building permit and other things. So the next 3-4 months is some decisions, and there's also some decisions that we needed sort of up front, and I don't need to belabor that now, I'm just saying we're looking for these. Is the food pantry included? If the food pantry is included, that was 1,000 square feet, so which part of the building is deleted? And it was my understanding that the layout was okay with the town council. I don't think that we had a formal vote on the layout of the building, but I just want to make sure that, as you saw, we're beginning to get into more technical drawings. We don't want to be having wholesale changes to the basic layout. It's such a simple building. You know, I didn't anticipate that, but those are the 3 items that, you know, are stakes in the ground for us starting. And when meeting 2 is scheduled, and I think the next 2 meetings, I understood were not going to be held, we would make a presentation and be looking for feedback on interior finished materials for the multi-purpose room, all the different spaces. We would be presenting actual samples of the exterior materials, specifically the windows and the roofing we haven't discussed. And the roofing is something that we will want to present because there's a good range of costs in that selection. The audio, visual, and hearing assist program, you know, how extensive is that for this project? We need to define that so we can get that consultant integrating that component into the building. And then, there's potential to divide the multi-purpose room into, a 1/3 and a 2/3 section with a movable partition. That partition's expensive, and we just want to make sure that the town wants that, and we're not just assuming that you want that without really having that discussion. And we showed some options for the multi-purpose room, whether that be a exposed wood ceiling or a concealed finished ceiling. It would have different appearances, and we resurrect that discussion for the next meeting we have. And then following that, 2 weeks, we would have our engineers present the building systems and understand exactly how you want to control it. We have ability to run a central system to the town offices. Other projects, we have it all self-contained in the building itself, so the digital controls for the system is something to talk about. Just confirming the fuel source, review the fire protection scheme. As I've mentioned before, the fire protection on this phase of the building is not required for code, but if you ever get to adding on the gym or any other programming, you get to a larger building, fire protection is, we think it, makes some sense to put it in from the start, and just would like to confirm that decision, confirm a generator or not. Do you want to have the building potentially be available if there's a power outage in town that folks could come in there in the wintertime or not? We would like to discuss the community garden, any other exterior amenities. I like what Mark was just saying, put a trail on the upland. I think seniors might like something that's a little bit shorter, and you could always expand it later, but that's a nice idea to incorporate something on the upland, so that might be a great discussion. And these all don't take very long, but at that next benchmark, whether it takes 1 or 2 meetings, we want to go over security, access control, and your IT, and begin to look at the furniture budget. I know there's some furniture that's already been purchased, so we just need to organize ourselves and be able to bring these to conclusions, either at this meeting or at the following meeting. And that would lead us up to either the 4th or the 5th meeting, where we'll have a cost estimate and be prepared to present where the project is. And from that, then we're sort of on the downhill stretch where the building committee doesn't have to make, you've already made the gist of your decisions, and it's a matter of completing the documents. I did want to make a comment about, we've had some conversations with some contractors and the cost estimators, and I see there's a spelling mistake here at program, but I just wanted to mention that having a major add alternate to the building is somewhat complicated. It's hard to engineer it for us because you're having to figure out a building and then add on the heating, cooling, sprinklers, electrical that may or may not happen depending on the bids. So when it's something as big as add on a food pantry or add on 2 rooms to the building, it can be a complicated issue. And some of the contractors have said, that this is a pretty simple, straightforward, very nice building for a contractor of a certain size. It's not a huge project, and that smaller contractor may not want to have a really complicated bidding with 3 or 4 or 5 add alternates to the project. If we can keep it simple, non-complicated, very straightforward, it's a very simple project to bid. It's a simple project to run, and they think we would get more competition in terms of bidders, and that's really what we're looking for, is to attract people. And I know that when the architect and engineering went out, there wasn't a lot of competition. It actually had to go out twice my note of caution at the end of here was, you know, we'd probably like to make the decision on the food pantry up front and then not have something that's that large and that complicated be an alternate.
So, okay.
So that's an overview. I don't know if that helps explain to those folks that maybe are new to the design process what we're doing in this design development phase. But it's really to wrap up all the decisions on finishes, materials, and the building systems by now and September.
Can members get a copy of that so we have reference it, and in our minds we can be thinking ahead of the meeting about such things?
Sure. Put it on our refrigerators.
That was the idea of presenting this out, and I wasn't sure with the summer which meetings we might have or not have. So after tonight, if you want to deliberate after we're done on the next series of meetings are, we can pick that up tomorrow and then issue this. And then the idea is that exactly what you said, you can think about what we need for the next meeting and be prepared. And we will sort of, help with that as these meetings go along in the process as well.
Through the co-chairs, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Joel, I think that you had done a cost estimate not that long ago on the 6,600 square foot building layout, parking and everything, and that came in just over $6 million, right? Something like that. And so then, after the fact, we had a discussion, or there was consideration about the food pantry. I think that was an ad alternate of about $350,000 or something like that. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. So just me speaking as an advisor and staff person here, and understanding timelines and the grant and what we have available as resources and what the town is looking to supplement this in other resources. My suggestion would be to go with the original 6,600 square foot building. I think you had the ad alternate to bring the price down by removing an office and a smaller room. Is that right?
The activity, he has removing the activity.
So I mean, to simplify the project and based on the conversation we had with DEM, my suggestion would be to start designing or start discussing the 6,600 square foot building with the ad alternate to remove those two rooms. The food pantry, while that would be a nice amenity, I guess, for the town and for the building, that's an additional $350,000 on top of the limited budget that we already have. And I would think it would be prudent for us as a group and for the town itself to move forward with the initial project at the 6,600 square foot building with an ad alternate to actually reduce that budget if necessary. That would be my suggestion. Anything internally within the building, I think you can look at and offer this group cost comparisons, and as they work through that process, like with the room divider and the interior ceiling design and things like that, as they're seeing the budget and what that's doing to the budget, we could add that on as part of the discussion based on your advice to them. It may come to an either or. Either we do the room divider or we do the ceiling. Which one is it going to be? So those conversations could be ongoing, but I think the basis of the project and the beginning of the project should be, and it's only my opinion, and I'm only here as an advisor, not to vote, should be the 6,600 square foot building. That would give you clear direction, I would think.
I did want to ask, while the administrator's here too, is I know that there has been talks and additional grant research to move forward to get the food pantry included. I know that's an expansion that's above and beyond the 6,600 square feet, but I know that you've been working on, getting additional funds allocated for such a building element. So has there been any updates on that?
No.
Okay.
The only thing we know at this point is we have $4 million, and all the documentation of the $4 million has been finalized through the planning office. We have not been given official access to those monies yet.
Okay.
Which is critical, and we need to stay on top of, because right now we're deficit spending on the design side.
Okay.
Only because things in Washington
Right.
aren't very clear. And I don't think they're gonna get clear until Congress starts to deal with a need to give approval to, on the debt limits.
Sure.
So when the debt limit discussion happens, it's gonna be required a bipartisan approach. And I think at that point in time, the congressional leadership will have the opportunity to make sure that the direct appropriations are going to be preserved. The money that we have requested, or we're hoping to request through the CDBG program for road access is not gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line is, we ran into two separate issues. Issue one pertains to the fact that this is a multi-generational facility, and basically what the state's saying is, you guys don't meet the low moderate income requirements. So unless it's 100% senior, nobody else, you're not eligible, because the seniors automatically eligible. And two, they all of a sudden just determined that they weren't gonna use any money for new construction.
Mm.
So we were basically kicked to the curb on that one.
Okay.
So we're still struggling, not struggling, but trying to find alternative funds. But right now, most of the funding is in flux because of Washington.
Right.
And we're also looking very closely at the state level, state programs. And I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer here, I'm just trying to be upfront. A lot of the stuff coming out of Washington is some pretty severe cuts in Medicare. And Medicaid, SNAP, and those programs. And what may happen as a result of that, if they go through, is that the state of Rhode Island is gonna have to step up and fill some of the holes. And if they fill some of the holes, where is that money coming from?
Sure.
Is it going to eliminate other programs that we may have assumed we could access? So everything right now is a big gray area.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why I think it's really important, might as well continue on the theme of being Debbie Downer. I think it's really important that as this process, we need to be very careful. We had talked about this very early on with the council on the Councilman Punchak, that we needed to know that there is an option to scale back
Yep.
if the budget wasn't there. So I think that the plans that are being put, there needs to be a clear idea as to where that area of demarcation could be and what the budget impact would be, so that we have the ability to pivot quickly
Yeah.
as the funding issue surface. And one final thing I'd like to also mention, I would present this to the architect. When we talk about if we do like a backup power generation, those kinds of things, can this building?
Make sure you can hear yourself.
I'm sorry.
That's right.
Can this building be also positioned as a, as an emergency management site?
Yep.
Where we can house people in the event of extreme issues? If so, that opens up the window or door to maybe get EMA funding for the backup power generators. We did that at the Innovate Newport project in Newport, and they used a section downstairs and set up a place for police and fire to come together and to manage extreme events, and we were able to get a lot of EMA money to make that happen.
Okay.
So we may want to keep our eyes open on that one.
Yeah, I know currently with the master plan cost estimate, we do include having a generator on site, so that will certainly be beneficial for us.
Right, so we need to find out, that's a lot of money.
Yep.
Is there a way, based on what this building's used for, that we can maybe access money that currently we're not looking at?
Sure, sure.
To use to fund that?
It sounds to me, from what you've explained, Administrator, that our schedule of, you know, getting close to the end of design development and our cost estimate is going to almost coincide with decisions that are being made down in
Yeah,
Washington.
I think we're going to get a lot more clarity at that
Yep.
time. Yeah.
So at that point, what we can do is, that will be the turning point when we're looking for approval with the council to move into construction documents for our bid documents.
Yeah.
And that would be a good time to really demarcate, okay, are we really going to be all in on this ad alternate? Or are we going to, you know, take it right out?
Right.
Because we need to maintain budget. So, I like I said, the timing of both the ending of the design development cost estimate, the items that are going on in DC will certainly brings, as you said, bring some clarity.
And one final comment too, and I'll shut up. Councilman Punchak, this is kind of similar to the conversation we had as it relates to the public safety complex. We may want to have a discussion about what is the development model here. Is the assumption that you're going to do design bid? We may want to take a serious look at doing a CM approach to this, only that it would give us a lot more flexibility to deal with a lot of the nuances that the architect's outlining, to give us the ability to be very flexible to move quickly.
Just make sure your mic's on.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
Scott, you mentioned that if it was a senior project only, there'd be more money available.
I think if there was only a senior project, it would be eligible for CDBG funding. That's correct.
Would adding the food pantry make it eligible for things that it isn't eligible for now?
That's a possibility.
Because that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
The food pantry might actually open up doors for funds.
And to be honest with you, I think to respond to Jeff, the comment you made at the beginning, question you asked in the beginning, have we really dug into what are the unique funding sources for food pantries?
Yeah.
The answer to that question is no, but we should, because that may open up other funding sources that this project wouldn't be eligible for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jeff, the issue of the food pantry, I think, clearly is fundamental. It has been bantered about by the previous committee many times. We discussed it. We discussed the merits of it, how it belongs there, but ultimately it comes to the town council. And I think it would probably be in everyone's best interest to prioritize identifying whether it is or is not a priority, so that we can either push it to the side so that the architect can focus on other things, or if the council defines that it is a priority, the architect can spend the time to reconfigure to see if the footprint as it sits with reconfigured rooms would allow for the pantry to fall within the footprint that was previously discussed. Now, the only variable there would be, at some point you may find that if you prioritize the pantry, you may not have anything to, quote, lop off, right? Because you've used all of your available space. So that's a fundamental issue. We're either going to put enough importance on the job and the service that the food pantry serves, or we're not. It's that easy. And if you have to deal with money on the other end, you have to make that decision now that we're going to find a way to deal with money on the other end, but we want it there. So I don't know if it's better for the committee to prioritize either another meeting with the council or another meeting with ourselves to just flush out what the relevance and the benefit and disadvantage of the food pantry being there or not being there.
I would think that it would start with us first. We would have to decide amongst us what the inclusion of the food pantry or not, and then I think we can then bring it up higher with a recommendation from us, which then at that point actually it will have a point of view from us, and a decision can be made at a higher level. But I think whether it's at this meeting or whether it's at the next one, have an in-depth discussion on inclusion of the food pantry and what that would mean, space-wise, money-wise, all the above.
And I do think, of course, it's always going to come down to also money.
Yep.
But one of the things that may happen, if I knew this, I would be making hundreds of thousands of dollars as a consultant in DC. But if the state has to step in and deal with reductions in Medicaid and food SNAP program, one of the ways that they would step in is how do they deal with the issues of food security? And one of the ways that they could deal with food security is make sure they support the growth and sustainability of our food pantries.
and they then could make money available for projects like this. But we don't know yet. We won't know for a while, but that's a possibility.
So what I'm hearing is we have a lot of unknowns right now. We have unknowns about funding sources. We have unknowns about, you know, what the priorities are that lie with the council. What I'd like to see us do tonight is follow Mark's recommendation to move forward with the 6,600 square foot building, so then that way Joel and his team can keep moving. That way, I also understand that we have hired a new grant writer. Perhaps that we could get some insight from our new hire that we can, of where additional monies can go. She can probably advise the administration. The administration can report back to us. And then at that point, at our next meeting, we could have, we're gonna have our monthly updates to the town council. That can be brought up as a point of discussion. And if they feel with the information from the administration, from our recommendations about the food pantry, then that way we give them a more full picture for them to make a decision on. Right now, the decision was made to move forward with the plan that was presented. That was the 6,600 square foot building. And I'm gonna, double back a little bit on this too. And Joel, the building that was presented to DEM, that was the 6,600 square foot building, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so then there's gonna be some further adjustments there. So there's a lot of moving parts with this, and while I hate to start cutting something out right now, there's a lot of unknowns that we cannot make a decision or a recommendation on tonight, but I think in the upcoming weeks, we can start to get more clarity, get better understanding, speak with council, get further direction, speak with the grant writer, get further direction and understanding of potential funding, because right now, the last thing I want to do is, this project has been held up for 1.5 years already. We could have already had a building by now. So what I'd like to do is make sure that we keep our foot on the gas and make sure that Joel and Jeremy and their team continue to move forward in a productive way, and they're not waiting up for us to make a decision one way or another when we have so many unknowns to talk about.
Two questions quickly. One is, with regard to the DEM filing, what is the deadline by which this committee and the council would have to advise the architect to include a footprint for a potential pantry, so that we don't need to go back? What is that deadline, so that if we decided, regardless of the 6,600, if it was decided that we would like the opportunity to build the pantry, put it on the DEM filing or not, depending on what their deadline is. The second issue is, if we're sincere about flushing this out, I would like that the representatives of the pantry come and be prepared to give us a presentation, having seen the floor plan and the potential for what could be available to them, so they can make a considered presentation as to the viability, the functionality, the benefit, the disadvantage, so that when we think and when we speak, it's going to be with a level of intelligence, not just that we think it's a good idea. This way we have a better sense and conviction.
May I ask Joel a question?
Sure.
Joel, the impervious area, the square footage related to the food pantry, do you know what that number is? Because
1,200.
1,000 square feet.
1,000?
1,200.
12. Is that going to have any effect? We had a conversation with DEM, and I think the division director actually said to us, you're going to be close in your impervious calculation. I don't know how close, with regard to a different level of permitting through them. And I forgot the percentages, Joel, but it had to do with the impervious area and the fact that, we were removing impervious area out of the wetland, and then they had to do a general overall calculation of the impervious area, compare the two, and he said it's going to be close, but you're probably going to be under. And my question, maybe to PAR Engineering and not to you, Joel, is will that 1,200 square feet have an effect on the level of permit that we will be submitting to DEM. If it does, I would say you need to take that out.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to ask Power tomorrow. It does, in fact, it changes your stormwater calculations, and then the retention basins get redesigned, and it sort of ripples through the project
Sure.
in a way that's more complicated than just putting a box on the back of the building.
Yeah, I think the project's tight now, Joel, and you know, the retention areas, I think, are designed, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just going by what I saw on the plan, to be more or less minimal and kind of like a rain garden type layout, as opposed to a full-blown retention basin or underground in.
That's their goal, is, yeah.
Right. So any additional runoff that you add to that is going to have to increase the volume of those areas, whether you go underground infiltration or you go for it with a full-blown retention basin. I think if you could go to, and I'm not giving you direction, I guess I'll go through the committee, but if you could go to PAR and ask them that question and what effect that would have on the site plan, I think that would help this committee in making give them more information with regard to making their determination.
I have a question. Have we looked at all trying to include a food pantry within the confines of the 66 square foot building of what we already have that we could maybe afford?
I thought the conclusion was that you wanted separate access.
What?
I thought the conclusion was.
Well,
separate
you know, I want to be Queen of the May, but I'm too old. But I mean, have we looked into that possibility of doing that? I think we should. Just saying.
I think what you would do is you would take the front rooms off the building and put the food pantry on the back. I don't think you would convert the front rooms to a food pantry.
So we haven't tried then, or looked at it.
Steam didn't want to be the first thing that's in the building.
What if we collect the rainwater from the pantry to use for the garden? Why?
You can do anything, it's a calculation, it's just more work, and then you have to have more.
Did my question get answered, or did I miss something?
They did not look into
It's
putting the pantry in the
it's
Okay,
actually.
so the answer is no, we haven't looked at it.
Yeah, but.
Could we?
With
That's all I
regard
asked.
to the impervious, it's not actually what you do with the water.
Yeah.
It's the difference between the existing and the proposed. That's the, you can do whatever you want with the water. You can catch it all, right? And not, but it's the level of permitting, and I forgot what the threshold was, but you have to be, I think you have to be at or under 80% of the existing impervious, or you get elevated into another level. And, you know, that may or may not have an effect, but they were very cautious in telling us, and they gave part of the direction. I remember hearing it clearly, and I specifically asked, because I didn't understand it, what are you talking about? And it really has to do with, it's going to be tight. In the impervious, the increase in the impervious is going to be tight from one level of permitting to the other, and that could elevate it from, Joel, what did you say, 60 days? It could elevate the permit review from 60 days to 6 months.
Yes, correct.
You should hold off on the discussion any further until, you know, Joel checks with PAR and see if it's actually going to have an effect. If it's going to have an effect, I think you need to move on. That's just my advice.
Right. It sounds like we just have a lot of unanswered questions that we need to do some more research on before we can definitively say one way or the other for the inclusion or exclusion of the food pantry.
Well, can we prioritize this one? Because it's fundamental. If the conclusion from PAR is that it puts us into the next tier,
Yep.
and we're going to triple or double the permitting process, then that's a reality. It's cold water in the face, and we can react to it. If they come back and say, no, you're fine, then that's other reality. So there's nothing that can be discussed of intelligence until we have that answer.
Right.
I would like the answer to see what it looks like if it were within the confines of the building, though. I really would like to see that. Then we can make a good decision.
Well, maybe we can ask both. Maybe the architect can do a quick potential layout if we stay within the footprint, and also get a consult from PAR as to how much larger the footprint can become before it sets off a trigger.
Do we know how many square feet the schools were in total?
Not offhand. Bigger than
They're
that.
gone.
But nobody knows how many square feet. we have.
I don't, but the DEM calculation is not going to include the schools, that's the,
But it's also,
But
the
it's a-
school was out of the jurisdictional zone, but Mark's right, it's the area that we're taking out of the wetland area is advantageous to DEM, and that's, that was the ratio that they were comparing to.
Okay.
But I can find out the answer to the question, I'll get that tomorrow morning.
Okay. So,
I just have a question, sort of jurisdictionally. The food pantry wasn't part of the master plan, and it hasn't been presented to town council to abandon the program that's been presented and then substitute in a food pantry. Is that something we could do, or do we have to remove it?
what, my plan of attack for this was, Joel, to have you report back to us to see if we cross that threshold. If we cross that threshold, then we are where we are. We kind of have to keep moving, keep our foot on the gas, and we can leave it behind and be studied at a later time. Then the other part is if PAR comes back and says, no, we're still good, we're still within that 60-day turnaround, is I would want to make sure we're getting information from the grant writer through the administration. The next council meeting is on June 16th. We're due to give them just an update of where we stand. I would pose the question to them, given if PAR gives us the thumbs up on everything, ask them about the priority for it, and if they would be willing to amend their motion that we got a month ago to include the food pantry into the program of the building that falls within that 6,600 square feet. If they so choose that they want to make that move, then I would ask that you and Jeremy play around with the programming a little bit to fit the food pantry in. We would invite the members of the food pantry in to understand what their needs are, because I know this was more of a diagrammatic sketch based off of a quick visit and highlights of what they have currently. So we would need to have a little bit more further discussion with them. So I think there's a couple of things that need to happen first before we really start to pick away at this a little bit more.
But I think, just as a suggestion, it might be more advantageous for us to meet with the pantry committee before we make any decision to the council. We could ask the council if they would give us if they would consider allowing us to investigate it, and then if we make a reasoned a vote to them, because I'd hate to get their permission, get their approval, then meet with the pantry and find out that when it's all said and done, it's maybe not that advantageous for them. That may not be the case, but I think it's better if we meet with them first so we understand what it is that we're asking the council to say yes to.
I thought the pantry said they wanted it to be out of the church, or the church wanted the pantry out.
No. The reason why they are looking to be relocated is because of accessibility. Right now, they are down in the basement of the church, and they have a lot of people that come and have issues carrying groceries up and down, and it's more to do with accessibility than agreements between the church and the pantry.
I've talked to the person in charge of the pantry, and I think I agree with Bob 100%. I think Darlene McGaw should come here and talk to us about what she's concerned that they have access that's convenient for people and keeps them out of the public eye to a certain extent. That was one of her concerns. And I think they'd like to be on one floor rather than going up and down the stairs with the food in and out. So I think it's critical that she come here and we all see exactly what her needs are and tell her what we could provide, and then we can put this to bed. But I think that's the next step before we have Joel do anything. I don't think we should give Joel this task until we know from her that we feel comfortable that's what we should do.
I've got
Except
I have
I
a quick
think we-
question.
Go ahead.
If we're adding this at the last second, is exactly what this is. This was not part of the original master plan. Never been discussed until maybe you people
No,
spoke about it.
it's been discussed.
Well,
It's been
maybe
discussed
not,
plenty.
it hasn't been discussed with the original plan.
No, it was in the
So
master
now
plan.
you're gonna add whatever the footage is, you're probably going to lose that off the original concept of the multi-generational building. Because we're already 2 million over. You're gonna be cutting back, not adding. So I don't even know why we're even having this discussion. If you were under budget going into this, it's a consideration. You're not even close. I don't even think the 6,600 is gonna make it. But the conversation keeps going. And for us to bring this to the council in a week and a half or 2 weeks, it's not fair to them to even give you an answer to a question like that.
I'm with you.
No, I don't think anyone said to bring it to the council at this meeting.
Yes, you did.
No.
You wanted to see if they would amend their resolution.
Well, then we don't have to do that. But if we're going to do due diligence, we at least should meet with the pantry and decide whether or not it's even viable.
Right.
If we're afraid to make any changes, or if we're going to be chasing our tail from the beginning of this process, we haven't even flushed out the fundraising. If we're going to be constantly taking out the guillotine to the budget, then it's going to be an arduous, very painful and depressing process to build the building if we're constantly chasing dollars. If that's the only reality, then fine. Then we start hacking away at this thing now. But if we're going to throw in the towel without at least flushing it out, we have the time. And if the town and the council wants to prioritize it because we made a change, fine. They say yes, they say no, we move on. If we don't, at least you owe it to the people who use the food pantry to flush it out and say, is it viable to have here? Is it not? Okay, if it is it worth the money? Is it not? To just pretend like it doesn't exist is an approach, but I don't think that's why we're here, to just fast track everything through.
Bob, that's not what I was saying. And you know, as far as food pantries, I'm a nurse. I've worked with people that are food insecure. I know what they do. I know what is needed. My only concern is that, we're taxpayers too. I pay taxes on 2 houses. But if we can even look at the fact that it could fit within the confines of something that we may or may not be able to afford, but close to afford, why not give it a try? And then, let me finish, okay, Bob? But you know, the thing is, we don't know if there's enough money to put this $350,000 addition. It's very lovely, you know? I mean, I would love to see a whole lot more myself as far as what rooms we're going to be using. But you know, the reality is, with the administration we have now, we're lucky if we get any grants at all. And I think you'd have to be under a rock not to believe that. But even though food pantry is used by a lot of people, not just seniors, a lot of young people are probably just as insecure with food as older folks are. Old folks can get, you know, the food, the farmer's market stuff and all that kind of good stuff. But, you know, we came up with this 66 square foot thing. Can we even look to see if we can put a pantry in there? I know they want to be private. I know they want a separate entrance, and I get that. Truly, I do. You know, as a nurse, I've worked with people like this right along. But can we at least look at it and then have them come in and say, you know, we can offer you this. It's a design. We didn't build it yet. Can we look at it and see, would this meet your needs?
Yeah, the point I was making is for us to understand what their needs are. We don't even know if the 350,000 is viable, if it's high or if it's low. All I'm saying is, at least give them the opportunity to tell us what they would need if it is something that
Yeah.
can be done.
If you had a
Whether
big
it's
wish
within the
list, yeah.
footprint or without,
Right.
outside the footprint.
Right.
Let's just get the one decision.
Mm-hmm.
What do they need? Can we even consider it, whether it's within the footprint or in addition to the
Exactly,
footprint?
and can we afford it?
Well,
Because, I mean, that's gonna be a
well,
big
you have
thing.
you have to take step one before you
Yeah.
can take step
No,
2
I
and
got it.
3. We
And-
don't even know
Yeah.
if it's something that is viable. So all I'm suggesting is that we take the opportunity, so at least we can say to people at the end of this process that we did our due diligence. That's all.
Yeah, and, I'd be willing to listen to them, but let's look at, can we include it? All I'm saying, I've seen food pantries in Blackstone, they're downstairs, or they're in repurposed buildings that they're usually not in a brand spanking new place, And, if they can be included in there, yay, because maybe we can afford to do it. But I think we ought to try. That's all.
Just ask it, since this doesn't really concern us until you get to a decision, do you mind if we excuse ourselves? It's just, bipartisan of this conversation.
No, Joel, Jeremy, we appreciate you taking the time for this. For the purposes of just recapping some action that we need from you folks, though, is that we'll hear back from you with your discussion on PAR about the square footage, putting us over or under the impervious area. But I also believe at this point, we want to make sure that we're starting the design development process appropriately, because we know that you guys need to move in order to maintain schedule and everything. So that's why I was trying to propose it to everybody, a couple of parallel tracks.
I understand we are.
Yep. So.
It's an internal decision, it's not our decision.
Right. And, but for your purposes, I think the plan that was approved at council last month was the one that we have to date. The one without the food pantry added to it. So for calculations for MEP, your square footage is going to be still remaining the same. Structurally, things are going to be remaining the same. So your team can continue to move forward. But before you leave, I do want to make, you had a couple meetings suggested, posted up on your PDF that you brought up. And I just want to get everybody on the same date as far as meeting dates go. So then that way we're all in alignment for the next 3-4 meetings. Yeah, he said he would email that out. So in 2 weeks, it's June 19th. That's a federal holiday, so we won't be able to be meeting at that point. The next Thursday is July 3rd, again, the night before July 4th. So I would assume that the next meeting we would either have would be a regularly scheduled meeting on July 17th, or I did speak with Denise about looking for the week of July 7th, but if the 17th works for everybody, we can maintain the 17th. Does that work well? Okay. So then, Joel, we'll maintain the 17th as that next meeting for the exterior materials, the interior materials, as you outlined. And then we'll plan that the August 7th would be the third meeting. August 21st would probably be the fourth meeting.
One quick note, can they check with, I know there's a hydrant down there, but maybe they can check to see if the water department has any data on pressure as to whether or
Flow
not.
test.
Yeah, flow test, so they know whether or not they're gonna need a fire pump.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, we don't need a fire pump, but we do need a flow test.
Okay. All right. All right, thank you very much, Joel. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Ron.
So, to kind of put maybe a button on this, I think the food pantry discussion, I would feel comfortable if it happens rather quickly, because I think we've gotten to this point, and yes, at the joint meeting, it was presented as a possible add-on. But I think if we were seriously considering this, then we should have been doing that months and months ago when we were constantly looking at this floor plan as what each room was. So I am more than willing to go down a road to examine options, but I think in the interests of keeping everything moving, I think we have to wrap this up relatively quickly. So because of holidays, we now won't meet until the 17th, but if the food pantry, well, based on what will come of PAR's recommendations, I guess that's if they say, yes, you could, then I think we could have that conversation with the food pantry on the 17th and then basically wrap that up with what we want to do so this doesn't continue to linger. Because I think we really need to start to laser in on what elements are going to be there and not branch off at this point onto different other elements. Because Joel has put a lot of work in and Jeremy have put a lot of work into the design. So to start to break off pieces of that or change pieces of that, I think sends us down different roads.
So the discussion about meeting with the food pantry kind of, in my opinion, originated, at least tonight, with talking about specifics. Well, should we, if we have a meeting or we get together with the food pantry, what is the likelihood of them saying, no, we don't want to go to this new building?
I think I've talked to Darlene McGaw, who goes to my church. We've discussed this a number of times, and I've wanted her to be here sooner, okay? I think if she realizes that either it's now or never, she'll be here. I think they would like to go there. They just have concerns about the layout, the privacy, and the room. That's what their concerns are. And I think we should meet with her as soon as possible, well before July 17th. So we'll know and she'll know what we can do or we can't do.
But I guess
At least what we could potentially do.
I would say, though, I agree with all of that, but ultimately, if the decision is gonna go back to the council, if the importance, if one plan was approved and it did not include a food pantry, and we've got 6,600 square feet to work with, and if that 6,600 square feet now has to include potentially 1,200 square feet for a food pantry, because that is what is more important than something else, we can talk to her all we want, and, you know, I'm not diminishing anything, but if we have that conversation and it goes to the council and the council says, no, this was never part of it, it was 6,600 square feet, this is the building that we were sold on, sorry.
And I agree, and I was listening to what Linda said, 6,600, I think if we decide to redesign part of the building to include the food pantry in the footprint of 6,600 square feet, I don't think the council would have a problem with that. I don't know. The food pantry, because I was on the original board, has been brought up ever since we discussed this multi-generational center. For anybody to think that it has not been discussed, then they weren't listening to the conversation. Shame on me that when Joel came up with the first plan, I didn't say, well, where's the food pantry? I didn't push it then, okay? But as far as what did we want in this new building, the food pantry has always been brought up.
You're right.
Okay? So let's not think that it's coming up now at the last minute. It has been discussed for a long time. All right? You weren't on the council when it was first discussed, David. No, I'm just saying, I'm not just
I
saying.
know it's,
You discussed it and I
Please.
discussed it.
Yeah, exactly, thank you. Yes, we did, we did. Exactly. So I think, to be fair, I think we should have Darlene to come in here for a meeting with our group, see what she needs, listen to her, then we can decide whether we feel it's good enough to do it, and then we go to the council and say, you know, we'd like to adjust the internal design of the 6,600 square feet to include a food pantry of 800 square feet, or whatever the heck it happens to be. Okay?
I mean, just to reinforce, this is just exploratory. how we use our time, we're not costing anyone any money. We're not engaging the architect. We're not wasting anyone's time but our own, if you call it a waste. We're just meeting with them. We will make it painfully clear we are exploring the opportunity to give you access to the building. There's a mountain to climb. If we can't climb the mountain, then that's the end of the equation.
And to go back to what you and I had talked about many, I think it was 2022. I mean, it's no secret. I would love that whole building to be used just for seniors. You know that. I mean, that's been my mission. But this was what we have. And, you know, seniors could use some food too. You know, and you know, maybe, and I know he's done a lot of work on this. I get it. And I apologize that I was being selfish. I was never saying food pantry, but if that's what we have, and that's the money we have, I mean, do I want to give up some of these? No. But if it could meet the needs of them, you know, maybe it's not going to be as grand or as huge or whatever, but you know, it could work. And I think we ought to give it a try. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I have to live within my means. and I think with this climate of grants, I got to tell you, I'm not convinced that we're going to, you know, maybe we'll get that 1,500 one. I'm kind of hoping we get that one because we can add that to the 4 that we already have, and that could help us. But I really think we bring them in. Bring them in and say, you know, this is what we have. And maybe, you know, it could maybe work. If this works out that we can afford to do it and you know, all that stuff that he was talking about with the water and all of this can work, yay. But maybe we can't. That's all I got to say.
Okay.
But I remember, Bob.
So next steps, from listening to everybody speak tonight,
Bring him in.
I have two courses of action. Step one, obviously, get a response from PAIR. If they
Right.
say yes,
Yes.
that we can accommodate an additional 1,200 square feet, great, we'll start moving forward. If they say no, there's no change. If they say yes, our next steps would be to meet with the food pantry representatives, figure out their needs in the program, and at that same time, working with the administration and the newly hired grant writer, try to figure out what other additional grants and funding sources may be available. Once we get a better picture of that, then we would, you know, get council approval to look to have the food pantry incorporated and reconfigure some of the
Yeah.
building plans.
Right.
And then there we go.
I think if you're gonna, part of that methodology is to keep in mind that we should set a threshold, a time whereby when Joel says to us, I have to know by this date that
Yeah.
I have exactly the footprint and the room layout so I can get into the next phase. That is our demarcation point. If a decision hasn't been made by then we revert back to what is.
Sure.
But the only qualifier to what you just said is you didn't necessarily include the option that if PAR says we cannot go beyond the footprint to be inclusive of the addition, do we still want to consider trying to
Redesign.
fit it within the footprint that we have? So if that were the case, we would meet with the food pantry regardless of
Is that
what
big
PAR
enough?
says.
Yeah.
Yep.
What PAR's decision would just direct us. We can either have the option of 2 things or only the option of 1 thing.
Yep.
So I don't know if you want to, so we
Well-
can expedite this if you wanted to, as Bob was saying, set a date prior to the 17th so we can
Yeah.
put this to bed?
I did email the administrative assistant to figure out when the council chambers are open. So if we wanted to, yeah, go right ahead.
Why couldn't we have a class trip to the food pantry? and
We
see-
would have to
we
be,
had one
we would have to
already,
be in
yeah.
groups of 2.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if we all meet together,
Yeah.
it's a public meeting. And we would have to open up the pantry to be,
And
Public.
plus what they have are all separate rooms and stuff,
Oh,
so it's
I-
not
yeah,
what,
I
yeah.
wouldn't know,
it's not,
Certainly, if you'd like to see the food pantry, I'll be happy to.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And, you know,
But it is all separate rooms, it's,
I've-
you know, couple of rooms.
Used to be classrooms.
Yeah, yeah.
I had gone a
Yeah,
couple
you
weeks
went,
ago,
yeah.
and I took a video,
Yeah.
so I can share that
Oh,
video with the
yeah.
committee too.
Yeah.
Scott's been down. I took-
Yeah, Scott went, yeah.
So I was gonna say, not next week, but June 30th is a Monday, July 1st is a Tuesday. I didn't know if anybody had availability to meet then,
Wouldn't, say that again?
either June 30th, a Monday, or July 1st, a Tuesday. If folks have availability then, I would suggest that we invite the members of the food pantry to come and speak to us about their program and their needs and what they would expect out of,
So we're not gonna have that meeting on the Thursday, right? Or are we?
not the
On the 3rd,
19th.
because it's the day before 4th of July?
Right.
Right,
I was
I-
assuming that most
yeah.
people would be
Yeah, I'm
out
not,
of town.
well, especially if we're gonna meet, I'd rather meet on the 1st myself, I think.
Either day is fine, but.
Yeah, I can adjust. Either
Any
one.
preference?
No preference.
30th or 1st? All
I
right.
like the
so-
1st.
So we'll extend an invitation to the food pantry for July 1st.
What time?
We'll do our normal 6 o'clock.
So is this meeting contingent upon what PAR is going to
I
determine, or
think
do
regardless, from what Robert was saying, if PAR determines that we can put on an addition within reasonable limits, then that's an option. But if we feel strongly enough that we need to redesign the interior of the building, we'll still have an idea of their program that we need to fit either in an addition to the building or within the building. So we'll at least have I know Joel and Jeremy put this 12,000 square feet together as kind of an arbitrary, first step, just diagrammatically understanding,
Right. Why don't we just ask what they need, rather than what we have to offer, because we don't know what
Right.
we have to offer yet.
Exactly. So we'll plan for July 1st for that meeting. All right. Moving along then, unless there's any further discussion about the building program.
We did the grants already.
Yeah, I believe Scott touched on the grants already, so unless there's any other questions that we need to relay.
I do have a list of some grants that I've made a list of. Interestingly enough, they're all dealing with the food pantry. So besides looking at federal grants, which seems to be a problem, there are also other grants available.
CJ, could you give Mrs. Lilly a microphone?
Can't hear what she's saying.
We're gonna mic you up, I'm sorry.
So I think this is just a very cursory first look, but there are grants available from outside well, some of them are the federal government, but Walmart pushes a lot of their grant programming towards food insecurity, and they particularly are interested in working in communities in which they have a store. So I think that would be a good match. I don't think they'll come anywhere close to $350,000 though. Stop and Shop also encourages donations towards groups that are working towards food insecurity or overcoming it. But it doesn't look like they give out very much, maybe $1,000, but I mean, it could buy shelving or something, I don't know. The USDA, which is federal, does a community food projects competitive grant. And this might work better if the grant was written as a kind of link to the kitchen and nutrition and cooking classes, which is somehow we can kind of fluff it up and make it look good. USDA also does a rural communities infrastructure type grants. They work these in tiers, so the poorer you are and the more rural you are, the less people you have per acre or whatever, the higher that you are tranched in their projects. But we do qualify as somewhat rural. We're probably a little too rich, however, but we could probably come in at the very
Not as
bottom of
rural
their
as we
list.
used to be.
And these are substantial.
Mm-hmm.
These are for like building health clinics. These are substantial grants. The Bank of America has a foundation sponsorship. I don't know how much money they give out. Ameriprise does community grants, but they are tied to volunteerism of their own employees. So we would have to have Ameriprise employees as volunteers at the food pantry. And the food pantry would probably have to be the entity that is actually asking for the grant. So it might be we could cobble together between the food pantry itself asking for money and for us asking for money. But I'm sure there's much more. We haven't even looked at the Rhode Island Foundation and other grants that are not tied to the federal government. AARP also gives out a lot of grants,
They do
a
the
lot of them
community.
dealing with building community. It could involve the food pantry. It could involve things like a playground that includes every age, or
Yeah.
they have all kinds of things. So there's a lot of grants out there. So I'll be glad to give you this list, and I'm done.
Perfect, thank you.
Champlin, Ann, did you ask about Champlin, did you check Champlin grants?
I did not, or Levy.
Levy grant, yeah, the Levy grant, yeah, Champlin grant,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
They're the ones that did Scottish Hall.
But I
Yeah.
wondered if there could be some local fundraising, like if we
Right.
have a restaurant week or something that would bring our community together to help build a pool money.
Well, the good thing is we now have a building design that's been approved by the council, so we can use that as collateral to start showing off what
Yeah.
could be. We've been kind of talking pie in the sky, so now that it's been solidified, we can start to put those things together.
yeah.
So when are we going to have our grounds tour with our laid out footprint? And tour guides?
Not at 90 degrees today.
See that?
It's beautiful outside.
No.
I love this heat.
That was actually one
Yeah.
thing I did want to
Yeah.
ask
Yeah.
Ray with his crew, if you're able to, at some point, cut down some of the grass so that we can stake out the building, so people can get an understanding of where things are going to be. Doesn't have to, certainly not a priority right now, because I know you have a full plate, but just in the, especially with things being nicer, the weather turning nicer, people looking for things to do, could certainly invite them down to the site
Yeah.
and say, this is where things are going to be
So
going.
they can believe us.
So-
Nobody
and-
believes us anymore. They don't. I wanted to have, we do that Senior Center Month in September. We were at the Beef Barn last year, and we had a lot of people. And I was thinking, geez, wouldn't it be cool to have it down there? But then we'd have to have porta potties, so I nixed that idea until the building's actually there. Then we can.
Okay. All right, does anybody else have anything on,
So you got something? Are you good?
No.
No,
No,
I'm just
okay.
sitting here listening.
okay.
Yeah, okay.
Like I said, we checked off updates on grants. Thank you, Mrs. Lilly, for that extensive list. Could you email that to me so I
I
could?
can give you a paper copy. I'll email Scott though.
Perfect, that would be great, so then
Yeah.
we can distribute it
Because we've got to find a grant writer.
however it
Yeah.
works. Fundraising strategies, options, and goals. I want to keep this as a continued discussion from our past meetings. If anybody is starting to have additional thoughts as to additional options, as opposed to what I've in addition to what I've presented to date with all the fundraising opportunities, naming opportunities and stuff like that. So if there's anything that anybody else wants to speak to on that, that's certainly open for discussion.
When do you
I just-
when do you want to try to start this? I mean, if we're gonna be chasing our tails, cutting this and cutting that, shouldn't we also start to see how much money we can get from businesses and what have you? So that at least, the curtain, for example, there's 10 reasons you can say yes, 10 reasons you can say no for that divider. But if we know that we're getting money, again, we don't need to spend it necessarily, but there's a ton of money out there, potentially. Whether you want to believe that, the economy is then no one's going to give any money, they're all jaded, they're all angry, I have no idea. But there's countless businesses in this community that can benefit by saying to the people, we helped you build your center. I have a commitment for in excess of 50. I can't speak of it, but it's there, excess of 50,000. And that's just one of countless businesses that could afford less, could afford more. So, but we need a plan. We need to either have somebody, if it's as simple as just taking the final footprint with all of the presentation and giving it to us if we're the ones that are gonna be doing it, and we make a list of the corporations and 2 of us go and make appointments, so it's never just the pressure's on one. I think, and then we need to try to set some kind of an objective. I mean, are we thinking that this is just, it's chump change, it's, and maybe we're gonna get 150,000, it's really not worth all the exercise. I'm not a lifer here, I don't know what all of you know. I mean, what is out there? And even, are you just gonna rule out the fact that we couldn't get 100,000 of $2 and $5 and $20? Is the community so out of sorts that they won't even consider giving $50 here, $100 there? You multiply that by 1,000 or 500 with an event of some kind. I think we have to start to seriously think about what we have the ability to do and not to do, and what we have the desire to do and not to do.
Well, I think when you look at organizations that raise money, they raise money in different ways with different people. So someone who works, say, as a development person for a hospital, they're gonna know who the key money givers are in their community. They're going to know who's got the deep pockets. And they're going to court them and give them information and schmooze them and so on. The $10, $20, $50 people, these are the people that gets the tote bag and the mug and not to disparage them at all. They're whole part of the process, but you don't treat them the same way as you do. So you usually have someone who's a development director or somebody who can spend the time and keep files and knows their number and their phone numbers and where they live and how many kids they have. And, I was in sales, that's what you do. So I think you need someone on board that can do that. And I don't know if it has to be a paid position. I have somebody in mind who I think is pretty accomplished with being presentation and so on, and that's Paulette. She might be something Paulette would you wanted to. But we do have rich people that live in this town, and there's no problem, I think, asking them for a substantial amount of money, naming rights. But I think as part of bringing our community together is to look at what things we can do as activities that bring us together and makes everyone feel that they're included in this process and they're helping build this. Now, I think, you said I was perfect. We had a plant sale. All the money that we used to run our garden, to buy our seeds, plants, string, whatever, we would use our plant sale money. We do it at Pacheco. We don't charge anything for our plants. We just said, donate what you want. We made over $800. And I thought for 3-4 hours of work, that was, and everyone was like, sure, and they just poured a 20 in, or 2 20s. It was, people are generous. They are. I think we can do that with our community.
So Ann, I have more of a logistical question then for you. When people donate money for the community garden, does that go into the account of the Parks and Rec Department?
No, it goes into this coffee can. It goes into a coffee can. And then when Cheryl Marandella goes out and buys something to go with the garden, she gives me the receipt. I put the receipt in the coffee can and I give her the money. When we order seeds from Johnny's or Fedco or whatever, we write down, spent this at Fedco, take the money out of the fund.
Okay, that might be a little bit more complicated when we're dealing with a
Yeah.
building.
Yeah, this is- Yeah. See, that's the other thing too. To whom are they going to donate? Are you a separate corporation? Are you a not-for-profit, tax exempt?
I think what needs to be done is there's 2 tracks that need to go on. Is while we are figuring out how best we want to fundraise and fundraise to, and everything that involves with that. I think there's a component within the town that involves particularly the administrator and the finance director of when money is brought in.
Exactly.
Where is it going to be deposited in particular, so we can communicate that with donors to know it's not going into a general fund that can get lost.
Or a coffee can.
Or a coffee can, that it is allocated, it is earmarked in a particular
right.
line item or wherever it may be. And I think before we accept any money whatsoever, or even solicit any money whatsoever, I think that needs to get fleshed out first, and an answer needs to be had, because I was trying to find where, I think we have in our charge, in our resolution, to fundraise, but to actually accept money may be beyond our charge.
Right.
So we just have to be careful how we tread in that regard, and make sure that our footing is solid for when we are ready to
I
hit
think
up
what
those
it's,
donors.
you're absolutely right, because I think what it says is that we find the people, or find the source, and let the town know about, because they certainly can't give it to us.
Correct.
They certainly cannot.
Correct.
They can't.
We
It has to
can,
go
we can
through
be the
town.
mouthpieces, but,
We can
and
be,
we
but
should
can't-
be.
but we can't get the money.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think
Gotta go.
Ann brings up a very good point.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have somebody be a fundraiser for us and compensate them to be that fundraiser. I don't know if the grant writer would really be involved
We
with
don't
this.
compensate them, we don't have any
Huh?
money.
Well, no, but they could get 5% of everything they raise for the project, or 10%, okay?
Can't do that, though. We're not
No.
a corporation to do that. We're a
I don't know,
committee.
I'm just saying, I'm just throwing this out because Ann said, Paulette Hamilton was a good fundraiser.
Well, I said I thought she had the skills.
Skills, right,
She's
right.
organized and she's polished.
How can we, David, you anything about that? Can we,
I think you need, in order to take money, I think a corporation or a nonprofit or something needs to be established.
but if somebody who represents us for the town of North Smithfield, for their community center, wouldn't that, if they were representing the town of North Smithfield, they're not representing you and me and Jeff, they're representing the town of North Smithfield, wouldn't that be a corporation?
So are you where is the money gonna go when it comes to?
It's gonna come into the town, it's gonna go into a transfer fund, and that transfer fund eventually will go to the development of the Halliwell Community Center.
We'd have to talk to the
But
finance.
all of this is, all
Yeah,
of this
Finance
is.
director would know.
Yeah, but all of, this is all secondary.
Right.
That's legalese, that's for the solicitor to decide
Yeah.
what the legal
Yeah.
channel is, what the process is. Has the town ever had such
know.
a
I don't know.
fundraising where you had a town fundraising for a building?
I don't
So
know.
that was his
The
question.
library, but that's not the town.
But they're a separate non-for-profit, 3C,
Right, but they.
tax exempt corporation.
Yeah, but they could be consulted for how they did it. I can't believe that other cities and towns in the immediate area have never done such a thing.
Well, it's the same thing with the Heritage
The
Association.
Heritage
The
Association.
Heritage Association rents
They're
the
separate.
buildings from town, but they get factored into the capital improvement plan, and they have line items, they have budgets.
Yep.
So I think it's just a partnership of either a 501c3,
Yeah.
which we could certainly make a
You
recommendation for.
want to read that to everybody so they see about the funding source?
I'll let you read it.
In our resolution, one of our charges is identify potential supplemental funding sources through public or private grants, donations, contributions, etc., to be referred to the town council and town administrator for consideration and action by the town. So
I understand, but that's legalese and ambiguous.
I know, I think it's
No, well, it states are very clear, but it's not functional. Fine, that's the legalese of it, but it's not functional. All we would have to do is modify that piece of legislation to allow for implementation. Because clearly, we're not going to get 5 corporations and unless the council says, yeah, tell them to call the town administrator and sit down with him and you give him the check. You know,
think
as
that's-
opposed to
Well-
saying, create a methodology by which there's a separate fund that the solicitor and the finance define, and the committee gets a check from ABC Trucking Company, and it's made out to this specific fund that the council told us to do it. That's delivered to the administrator, and it's deposited into that account. You know, that is the implementation of the idea.
I think we can go up to, in the end, what you have to look at is that the town is going to enter a contract with whoever is going to be the builder over there. The town is going to pay the bill, so the town needs control of those funds. Going by the letter of that resolution, I think we can skirt up to the line where it says that we will identify. That gives us a little bit of leeway to, as we had already talked about, is funding levels, tiers. Basically, we can get up to the point where we actually call somebody up and knock on their door and solicit and make a presentation. I think once it gets to that point, we may go over where our resolution says that we have authority, but we can go up to that point and say, here are all the documents, the presentation, the layout, the slideshow, the PowerPoint that can be used when somebody goes, whether it's the town administrator, whether it's designated through some other authority to somebody like us or a third party, that they can do it. But I think we can have that discussion on what materials should be presented and how it should be presented, and we can go up to that point. But the town needs to be the one to collect the money and pay the bills, because they're entering the contract with whoever's developing it all.
You know, that's exactly right. And you know what, I'm a nurse, but I've done a lot of fundraising, and I get the sources and I talk to the people and they tell me how much they're gonna give, and I say, finance director, there you go. You know, and I think we're saying the same thing. We can certainly talk to people, we can certainly make that relationship with the person, but then it has to go to the town, because like with the Heritage Society, you know, I've talked to Richard Keene, and they have become a separate entity. 3C, not-for-profit, tax exempt, and they can get money. But, you know, there's not saying you can't go talk, or Bob, go get that guy that wants to give us $50,000. But yeah, and talk with Scott Gibbs and the finance director and make it a separate fund, but it's got to go to the town. We can't get it.
Right.
We can talk to people, and we
yeah.
should.
I mean, if you go to Industrial Drive and talk to anybody up there, that's fine. But if you're going to walk into a Champlain Foundation or a CVS
Or a Rhode Island Foundation,
or
no, Rhode Island Foundation
you're gonna
doesn't do
sit down with board of
municipalities.
directors
Yeah.
or those who control the
Yeah.
funds.
Yeah.
You need somebody higher in this town than the 7 of us,
Yeah.
8 of us, 9 of us, that has a little bit of weight and authority to speak on behalf of the town. While we are appointed members of this board, we don't carry that weight for somebody to write off a $50,000 check to us.
Can I ask, I don't have that authority, but can I suggest that the chairs talk to the solicitor, explain that we are at a position where we want to try to implement a fundraising arm? What is the legalese by which we do that?
I was going to go as far as just making a motion for a recommendation tonight that we start that conversation with council, so that because they're going to have the authority to make new accounts. They're going through budget season now, so
Right,
might as well
exactly.
open
Now
up
is
an
the
account
time.
that with $1. I'll give them $1 to start the account,
Yeah.
you know? So I was actually going to make a motion that we recommend to town council that they begin opening up a fund for the Halliwell Multigenerational Center.
Well, but I think in concert or as a sub, you should ask for the solicitor to give guidance and the finance director as to the methodology by which corporate and private donations can be received and deposited. That's their bailiwick. But at some point, they need to give us the footprint, if indeed we're even gonna do
Yeah,
it.
well, I think you're right, because, I mean, the finance director is gonna be the one that would set something up and advise the council, quite honestly. Would you agree, Dave? That, you know, I know David Igliozzi will certainly sound up, you know, and take a voice in that, for sure.
Jeff, I think if you're gonna do a motion, I would direct that motion to the administrator and the
Yeah.
finance director, not the town council.
Yeah.
Because any budget issues right now have to go through the finance director.
Okay,
They don't go directly to the town council.
all right.
Yeah,
So are you amending your?
good point, Ray.
motion?
Well, yeah, I'll amend, my motion will be that we recommend to the administration that they begin looking at opening up a fund for the Halliwell Multigenerational Center. We keep council up to date on on this motion and recommendation, because we are wanting to move forward in going out, trying to solicit for donations and have them identify better what that process is going to be for us.
I think you may consider adding a question about whether or not the council is even willing to consider the idea of hiring someone to coordinate fundraising from a professional perspective or not.
Okay. That will be a second point of discussion. But we
Okay,
have a
so
motion on the table.
I don't really know what the motion is exactly, because
Yeah, we've changed it.
you lost me after
okay,
a
sorry.
motion that the administration will begin opening a fund for the Halliwell Multigenerational Center.
Stop.
Full stop, okay.
Yep.
Is there a?
Second.
First of all, if that is the full motion.
Yep.
Somebody should make a second.
I just did, second.
Linda
I said
seconded.
second.
Okay, now
didn't say
you can
Bob.
open for discussion, if that's the full motion, unless there was a lot of language
No, there
after
was.
that
There was.
Yeah.
Word
between
salad.
the two of you, so I'm just making sure
No.
our viewers at home are following along in as best as I can.
CJ, how many we got on tonight? All right.
Double digits?
Okay,
Thank you for those two that are watching.
so is there any motions?
All right. So
I was until Jeff made a motion and then.
Sorry, that
snapped me
got
back.
convoluted.
All right, so there's a
Is there-
motion, there's a second.
Yep.
So.
Is there any further
Now
discussion?
we can have any further discussion that we would like to have regarding this.
If there's no further discussion, then I'll just look for a general yay or nay. All in favor?
Yay?
All opposed? Great, not hearing any. So, Robert, I think your recommendation for hiring a fundraising expert or specialist, we can bring that, we can bring that, let's bring that discussion up to council as part of the co-chair's update to them and say, this has been discussed, is there an appetite for it?
Yeah, will you even entertain the idea?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then we'll get our marching orders that way.
Okay.
And they'll say it's not in the budget.
They say everything's
They
not.
take 10%.
Yeah.
They take 10% whatever they raise.
Okay.
They have a we have a grant writer for that.
Yeah, I know, but I'm not sure.
I'm not sure a grant writer would,
Yeah.
that's,
Two different.
yeah.
Maybe not, yeah, okay.
Grant writers are fundraisers.
Okay. We've had a lot of discussion tonight. Is there any other additional recommendations to council tonight? Opening it up to the floor. Okay, hearing none.
Very cool.
Last item on the agenda, adjournment. Do we have a motion? We have a, old habits die hard, right? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right, I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. That concludes tonight.